Yo, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to another Beats and Bytes live stream. We are here live in London. Thank you for coming. Thank you for tuning in. And yeah, let me get this bass line to stop playing so it won't be as distracting. But today I just wanted to talk with you basically about the main differences between the newly announced Launchpad X as well as the Launchpad Mini Mark III. In this talk, I wanted to cover the main differences between the two products, of course, give you a general overview of the Launchpad X as well as a general overview of the Launchpad Mini, and in that, help you hopefully find and decide which one is right for you and your workflow and your production style. So yeah, without further ado, again, thank you for tuning in. And also don't forget to leave any questions or comments in the comment section while you're watching this. And if you're watching this after it's gone live, please feel free to leave some questions in there because we watch these back and make sure we can answer all of those ahead of time. We'll also have a Q&A at the end. So leave your question, comment down there before you forget, and we'll get to it at the end of the video. All right, so let's start off with an overview of the Launchpad Mini. Similar to the Launchpad Mini Mark II, the Mark III has basically taken on the main big feature of the Launchpad Mark II. So now on the Mark III of the Launchpad Mini, we have RGB LED pads. These are great. They color coordinate with your Ableton Live session. You can already see here, I got a couple different colored here, and these all match clips within my Ableton Live session. We also have drum modes, we got keys modes, and we also have a user mode. And these user modes here, you can actually set up and build to be whatever you want using Novation components, which we'll touch on in a little bit. So by default, if you go over to the keys mode, you of course have your keys section here, and you got your drum section. But what's nice to know is that these don't actually have to be those. That's what they are by default, and you can actually set them up and customize them to be whatever you want them to be using components and basically overwrite what's on the unit already. Then of course, if you go to session mode, you have your sessions, you got things like your scene launching. Right, let's turn that volume back up. Maybe launch this scene here. And then you also got your stop, solo, and mutes across the bottom, so we can stop our drums, stop the piano part. And this is a great way to kind of bring some more performance to your setup. And it's kind of nice to be able to take this on stage, especially when you've already gotten your Ableton Live setup doing what you want it to do. And from there, all you really need to do is launch and stop clips. You're not really doing too much more than just that. It's a great performance tool, and it really helps take your laptop DAW, in this case Ableton Live, and turn it into a hardware, more tactile piece that allows you to perform a lot better and just a lot more. It helps you get in the groove of things, being able to kind of have things there and jam out on it. So as far as Launchpad Mini, that's really the whole package is what you get is all that. It's USB-C as well, which is nice, so you can easily plug it into any of your smartphones and use it with a lot of the mobile apps like the Launchpad app or Groovebox or Blocks or whatever you want. And it's pretty much class compliant. You plug it in, it'll work, especially on the Macs. And yeah, so let's jump over to the Launchpad X and get a little overview of the Launchpad X. So on the Launchpad X, you get a ton of stuff. You have the session mode, of course, which is very similar. You can see right there that the colors match across accordingly because they're the same clips that I have going on in the Ableton Live session. But if I hit session again, in there, this is where you have control over a bunch of different things. So by default, if I go to volume, I got my volume here. And the big addition to the Launchpad X over the Launchpad Mark II is that these are now velocity sensitive pads. The previous version was not. So we've improved upon the pads. The velocity feels better. I would even say they feel better than the Launchpad Pro at this point, and they are slightly bigger. And the other cool thing with this is similar to like our Circuit and SL Mark III. If you tap the pad a couple times, it actually gives you micro values between the values. That way you're not just stuck to 14 incremental values from 0 to, let's say, 127. You can actually hit a lot of other values in between. And utilizing the velocity sensitive pads, if I lightly tap this, you'll see it does a gradual fade down to the bottom. Or if I want to really bring something up quickly, just tap it at the top and bam, it goes up as fast as I hit it. So that's another fun way to kind of bring in some performative tools to when you're performing. Or if you just use the overdub button, you can automate a lot of stuff within your session as it plays out. If we jump down below that, we got our panning, track 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Basically, this will also match what the color coordination of your tracks are in Ableton. As you would expect, we have left, right, back to center if we needed, and that is all velocity sensitive as well in case you wanted to do some cool panning automation within your session. You have your sends, which is also fun. So for example, if I launch our drums, right, let me go to our volume, turn our volume back up. You got send A, send B. And again, if you turn on your automation, you can easily use these to automate whatever you need. And you might be noticing that I'm jumping back and forth in between the two, and that's because you can actually utilize multiple launchpads within the same session. Even if you had two X's or the Launchpad Mark II and the newer Mark III or the X, you can easily utilize these as different control surfaces within Ableton to control different things. So I can always stay in my note mode here. I can launch one of these armed tracks here and then start recording, launch my drums, and not have to worry about jumping back and forth. I can kind of stick around and just stick to this basically. Sticking with our sessions, we have in the session mode here, send A, send B, stop clips, mute clips, solo clips, very similar to what we got here on the Launchpad Mini, and as well as record arm. This is really fun because it easily jumps between tracks of what is armed. So let's say we arm this bass, and then we launch our drums, right? Then I want to write a new bass line. All I have to do is just hit this record arm button here and write a bass line. Turn that volume up on there. Get that reverb out of there. And Same thing, if I go back to session here, record on the next track. Go and maybe stop some of our clips, stop the drums, or stop them all at the same time. So utilizing the session on the Launchpad X is a great way to kind of basically bring in a bunch of different ways of playing your tracks and just kind of do some light mixing along the way. But what's cool here is on the Launchpad X you have the note mode, and if we go to the keys mode here, it'll show up as a chromatic keyboard, right? You got your white keys along the bottom, and then your black keys across the top. On the Launchpad X, if I press and hold note mode, here's one of the main big differences between the two. I actually can access scale mode. So this is the chromatic mode here. Right, blue is your white keys, these are your black keys. But what's nice is in note mode, I can actually select a different scale, and then this will actually change the layout of the notes. So the blue keys are actually the notes in scale, right? But the black keys are those that are not in scale. But say I wanted to actually only play notes in scale, press and hold note, hit that button there, and now whatever scale out of these 16 scales that I've selected are now active. And that's how you turn on scale mode. And I promise to try and not say the word scale anymore. But in there, you can change the overlay of how the notes are overlaid on the grid, allowing you to do triads or play fourths or fifths. Personally, I like sticking to this one, so my octaves are just right on the end. Really easy way to kind of keep track of things. And in the note mode as well, this is where, I believe this is the MIDI channel. And if we press and hold session mode, you also have different things like velocity sensitivity, as well as polyphonic aftertouch on the Launchpad X. And you also have some pad control here. In the velocity, turn it on or off, or set it to hard, medium, soft. Same with the aftertouch, and then just how bright the LEDs are. And this can also be accessed on here as well. Jumping from there, note mode, we also have the custom mode. And on this custom mode, we actually have 4 different pages of custom modes. On here, you have 3, but 2 of them are dedicated to drums and keys, where here you have a note mode, which dynamically changes depending on what you have armed. So if I go and I arm my drum track, let's say this track here, now it's turned to my drum rack, and it shows me what samples I have where. But if I go to drums here, it'll just show me by default the custom-made drum mode, which is also one of these custom modes here. So I hope that makes sense, that the custom modes here are by default set up to drum, keys, and a user, but you have basically your drum, keys, user, and you basically have 2 users here, but you still have the note mode that works perfectly with Ableton, and you can even jump around your drum rack 4 samples at a time, and it'll show you where you got samples loaded, where you don't, so you don't waste any time trying to hit something that doesn't even exist in that setting. Jumping over to custom mode, if we take a look at my laptop, I'll open up Novation Components. Let's see. Alex, would you mind switching over to the laptop? So in here, let's say we go to Launchpad X. Click this, and it will... Did it load somewhere else? Let's see. Oh, I think it's because I turned the Wi-Fi off. In Novation Components, let's see if that'll load this time. Components. There it is. Create custom mode. So in here, what this allows me to do is I have a perfect representation of my Launchpad X. And I can say on this portion, I want to put some drums there, some drum pads here. Let's change this over to green. And then let's go back to our widgets. I want a horizontal bipolar fader, and then I want 2 horizontal unipolar faders. Basically, the main difference there is one can go from 0 to 100, let's say. I think in this case it's going to be 127. And then this one goes from negative 127 to positive 127. It just kind of flips it up and lets you hit negative values. Or I think it starts at 63 and then goes to 0 and 127. So I'm basically building a custom setup, and I can drag and drop this to be however I want. I can even add program changes, MIDI CC buttons, MIDI notes, all along this top side here, fully customized stuff. So for example, if I say MIDI note here, my MIDI notes are going to be yellow. What MIDI channel is it going to go to? How does it act? What note is it? What octave is it in? And then even in there, I can say program change. Throw one here. How does this one act? What program change does it jump to? So if I'm setting up a live set or something like that, I can easily say, the first 8 presets of the first 8 songs are here. It doesn't matter where they are. I can easily build it up and have it be however it needs to be. What's great is once you log in, you save all this stuff to the cloud, and from there, you could just pull these up as you will to whatever session you need or whatever current performance you're working on. And once you do that, you just say send to Launchpad X, which custom mode, let's just send it to 4. And if you take a look at the Launchpad, boom, it's right there exactly with our little unipolar, as well as our 2 polars here. And the reason they're changing together is because they're all set to the same MIDI channel. I forgot to set that in the custom mode. But then I got my drums here, and same thing, they're all set to the same MIDI channel here. MIDI notes, program changes, and all this can be applied to whatever you need. And you got 4 pages of custom pages. So essentially, when it comes down to which is right for you, it really depends on where you're at in your music career, I guess. Like, this is a great starting point with the Launchpad Mini, but as you progress, you might want more things like the control over your mix, like with the volume and the pans and the sends and record arming and things like that you get on the X, which you don't get on the Mini. And a big differentiating factor for me is that on the X you have velocity sensitive pads, which you don't on the Mini. So I like to play a lot of my drum beats in. I can actually have access to a lot of that here, which if I were to do the same on here, it's always going to be set to basically 100, which is the velocity on these. So velocity sensitivity for me is a big thing, but when it comes to, let's say, iOS apps or anything like that, this is a great companion because it's small, it's easy to fit, and you can kind of keep it small, like keep your whole setup small. So it's not that bad to have this one over the other. And if you basically already have something like, let's say, a push or another way you make music in Ableton, but you want to perform your tracks live, this is another great companion to take live, because all you're really doing then is just launching clips, stopping clips, changing beats, jumping and kind of progressing through your song, because you still have access to your entire session within this by jumping up and kind of scrolling through your entire set, which is great. And then you still have the user modes, which you can then build up to do different things, especially if you're using like hardware synths and you want to do some program changes or set this up to be like the filter of a synthesizer or something like that. You can set these all to be MIDI CC values. So at the end of the day, it kind of depends. Like, I'd say this is more of a all-around piece that you can use in almost any situation, but the Launchpad Mini makes a great Swiss Army knife for Ableton Live that allows you to kind of inject it into your already set up workflow and kind of just keep things easy and keep things moving. So velocity sensitivity, no velocity sensitivity, they both have RGB LEDs. You have a lot more mix control using the mixer mode and the session mode on this end. And another big one is the capture MIDI button and the overdub button that you have on the X, which you do not have on the Mini. So if you use that a lot, the X is for you. So let's go ahead and jump to some questions. Let's see. Does Ableton Suite not have a free plugin? I'm not exactly sure what that question means, but with either of these, they come with a ton of included software. So you get things like DAW cassette, you even get, Splice for like 3 months, a bunch of Splice sounds, and you also get Ableton Live Lite with both of these in the box. So that is enough to kind of get you up and running when it comes to production. And let's see what else we got. So does either new Launchpad have any special iOS Groovebox or iOS apps? They do not, besides the Launchpad app, which has existed already, which is also free to download, and you can easily take advantage of that now with your phone that you have now without a Launchpad, which is great. But the other thing that's also good to check out, if you do have a Launchpad, is to check out the Launchpad Arcade, which is a really fun and interactive way of kind of getting to grips and learning your Launchpad a little better, and it's really just plug and play. It's based on the web. You use Web MIDI on Google Chrome or Opera, and you can just kind of start making music immediately. But if you were to take advantage of something like the Launchpad app, That's also a great place to make music because a lot of those loops are royalty free. You can easily record that over into a DAW. Can you use the Launchpad as a push? Specifically, the way push handles drum racks with the 16 pads on the bottom left and the 32. So no, you cannot. I think that's a proprietary thing to Ableton and push, because technically, almost when looking at Ableton, that step sequencer doesn't exist anywhere other than within those clips and getting a visual way to see those clips. So no, you cannot access the same 32-step sequencer across the top along with a drum rack across the bottom, but you do have access to the overdub as well as the drum rack visually representing the samples that you have loaded into your drum rack here. Another question that we got is, where can I download Launchpad Mark II plugin? I don't believe that exists, so I don't think we have a Launchpad Mark II plugin. So yeah, all these are class compliant. As long as you plug them in, they'll load up. And just check out Novation components, especially if you got the Mark IIIs, and those will easily allow you to access a lot of the custom modes and features of how to set this thing up. Can you still change pages, user mode on the X like on the Launchpads? Still change the page of the user mode. So if I go to custom, I have the 4 buttons across the right hand side here, which is basically user 1, user 2, user 3, user 4. And these can be mapped to do whatever. They have a bunch of stuff on here, but that's because I added them there. And last but not least, Pro is the one with Poly Aftertouch. No, surprisingly, the Launchpad X, because it's taken, basically they all kind of had a little hand-me-down of features, right? So if we had the Launchpad Pro Mark II, which had the polyphonic aftertouch and the velocity-sensitive pads, that's now been passed on to here, and we've even improved on those pads. So they're now slightly bigger, more sensitive, and these actually have poly aftertouch. The one downside you might find, though, is that Ableton Live does not support poly aftertouch. So if you're utilizing this with another program that does, you are totally set. But Ableton Live doesn't support it, which kind of sucks. But you have it on the Launchpad X, and you don't have it on here because these are not velocity sensitive on the Mini. Well, yeah, that's really it. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. As always, if you have any other questions, please leave them down in the comments. We'll get to them as soon as we can. We check all these for a long time to make sure that you get everything that you need. And yeah, until next time, I'll catch you all soon. Peace from London.